Singapore's leadership transition has entered a new phase. The 4G ministers will be deciding amongst themselves who will succeed Prime Minister Lee, and now that Heng Swee Keat has decided to stand aside as the group's leader and Prime Minister in waiting. Now, for a closer look, we're joined by Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University. Eugene, what's your take on the timing of this announcement? Was it unexpected?
Well, to me, it was certainly unexpected, Steve. I mean, it was a bolt out of the blue. If you look at DPM Heng's activity, in the past few weeks, it's been no telltale sign. I mean, he delivered his 10th budget. He made several keynote speeches. He was very much, in the public eye. So I would say that, this is something which is very surprising. I think, many Singaporeans are still very much coming to terms with the news. And I suppose, there is never a good time for such an announcement.
Professor Tan, you've described it as a bolt out of the blue for yourself, and it probably is for many Singaporeans. How big of a hit is this to the 4G leadership now, especially as we're in this ongoing fight against COVID-19?
It is a setback, I think, as a couple of the ministers have pointed out, during the press conference. But I don't think it's going to, in any way, affect the sort of focus and determination with which we are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think, in fact, the government is very clear, that the government will be very much assessed, on how it deals with the pandemic and how it prepares Singapore for the post-COVID-19 landscape. I think in terms of, the leadership transition and all, yes, that throws a spanner in the works. But we must also remember, that this 4G leadership renewal and succession has been built very much on the idea of a team, right? Very much about a collective leadership, not dominated by one person. Certainly the Prime Minister in waiting, was supposed to be the first among equals, but it's not going to fundamentally change, government policies. It's not going to affect public trust in the government. I think if you look at DPM Heng at the press conference, he was very much at ease, very much at peace with himself, and I think that reflects, the sort of confidence and calmness, with which he knows that this is a decision which is in the best interest of Singapore and Singaporeans.
But DPM Heng also cited his age as a major factor and that the next Prime Minister has to have a sufficiently long runway. Why is that so critical?
Well, this is, part of the key attribute of Singapore's leadership. We don't have a revolving door in terms of the prime ministers. If you look at the previous prime ministers, they serve in excess of 10 years. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, for example, has served 17 years and is still counting. And so the concern is that, with the pandemic, with the need to delay the handover of power because, the government is convinced, that changing horses midstream is not going to be good. That would mean that by the time DPM Heng takes over, right, he may well be in his mid-60s. And that means that even as he settles down to his job, he has to, in a way, hand over. And in many respects, COVID-19 has changed the landscape dramatically. I think it's right to describe COVID-19 pandemic as a great disruptor. And so now, the leader of Singapore in a post-COVID world, will not only have to rebuild Singapore, right, for a post-COVID-19 world, but also lead the country in very different circumstances. So in many sense, very different from what it was, when DPM Heng, was named, the successor to PM Lee, back in 2018. So in many sense, the pre-COVID and post-COVID worlds are radically different, and unfortunately, that has affected Singapore's leadership transition.
Professor Tan, The 4G leaders, the Prime Minister himself, described this unexpected development as a setback, a significant one, to the party's succession plans. I mean, they've said now that they need more time to choose a new leader. What do you think the timeline is likely to be?
It's hard to tell, particularly when we don't know when the pandemic will come to an end. But I think, in terms of ensuring that the government is able to maintain, the trust and confidence of Singaporeans as well as our important partners, including investors, I think we should perhaps, be able to identify, the Prime Minister in waiting, within the next 18 to 24 months, and then, that would enable, the Prime Minister in waiting, to have a fairly comfortable lead up, to his taking over. But that also we also have to bear in mind, that we do have to have a general election, by the end of 2025. So there are all these different timelines that are in play. But I think it is important, for the government to ensure, that there is no inordinate delay with regard to the naming of the successor. We shouldn't be hasty, but at the same time, it shouldn't take too long. And we must also avoid a second inordinate delay, which is, the handover, from Prime Minister Hsien Loong, to his 4G successor. I think it is a setback, but I think the real test now is how does Singapore and the 4G leadership bounce back, from this setback. In many ways, putting it as a setback may be somewhat overstating the matter. I think these things do happen. The best well-laid plans will from time to time be disrupted. And so how resilient we are in terms of responding to this change will really matter significantly.
Yeah, certainly will. Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University. And Professor Tan will be back with us shortly as we continue to navigate today's major developments.